My name is Amelia Blake. I'm 32 years old, an interior architect living in Portland. And 3 years ago, everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family came crashing down in one silent moment because my sister stole the man I was supposed to marry. I can still smell that night. Lavender blooming just outside the kitchen window. The sweet scent of grilled peaches wafting in from the patio. The open bottle of red wine breathing on the sideboard. It was supposed to be the beginning of the rest of my life. Our engagement party. A celebration of love, of 4 steady years with Nathaniel Nate my kind, measured fiancé. My parents' home in Ashland was strung with fairy lights. Our childhood backyard echoing with laughter and clinking glasses. I drifted through it all, with a warm certainty in my chest. I felt, chosen. We'd planned the whole event together. The soft jazz playlist, the menu, even the vintage cloth napkins Nate insisted made everything feel more us. Everything had its place, including my trust in him. He made me feel safe in a way I'd always craved, steady, calm, reliable. The kind of love I thought could never break, and yet, it did. At one point, the breeze turned cooler, and I stepped inside too. Grabbed the shawl I'd left in the hallway. The house was hushed in that golden lull, just before dusk when conversation softens and the air holds its breath. My bare feet padded across the hardwood, and that's when I heard it. Voices. Low, intimate. A laugh I knew too well. My sisters. I didn't mean to sneak up on them. I wasn't even thinking. But as I moved toward the den, I felt it, that instinctive twist in my gut that always knows what the heart doesn't want to admit. There they were. Nate, my younger sister, Sienna. He was facing her, one hand on her waist, her fingers lazily tracing the back of his neck. They weren't kissing, but they didn't have to be. The tension between them crackled. Their faces so close, their energy so charged, it felt like I'd stumbled upon something private, something sacred, but not mine. For a moment, they didn't even notice me. I stood frozen, feet glued to the floor, watching the two people I trusted most look at each other like I didn't exist. When they finally turned, the silence that followed was louder than any scream. Neither of them spoke. Not a word. No explanations. No lies. Just ... nothing. I backed away, slowly, quietly, heart hammering in my chest. My shawl slipped from my hand and lay crumpled on the floor. I didn't care. I just needed air. Needed outside. The party was still in full swing. Guests laughed under the fairy lights. My mother passed out champagne flutes with that proud sparkle in her eyes. And I stood there, invisible in my own celebration, watching a future dissolve in front of me. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't confront them. I went upstairs, packed my bag with shaking hands, left a note on the kitchen counter that read, "I need time," and slipped away before the sun rose. The sky was still gray when I pulled out of the driveway and left behind everything: my family, my plans, my almost husband. Back in Portland, my apartment felt alien, smaller, somehow, emptier. I stood in the living room and stared at the framed engagement photo on the mantel. We looked so happy, so confident. I took it down, put it in a box along with the others, and shoved them into the back of my closet under a pile of winter coats. I deleted Nate's number, blocked Sienna's, unfollowed, muted, erased. But grief isn't digital. It lingers in the scent of someone's shampoo on a forgotten hoodie. In the half-finished mug you suddenly remember was their favorite. In the echo of laughter you hear when you try to fall asleep. For a long time, I didn't tell anyone. Not my colleagues, not my closest friends. I wore a brave face and buried myself in work-long hours at the architecture firm, reworking blueprints that didn't need changing. I told myself that if I stayed busy enough, I wouldn't have to feel anything. But pain is patient. It waits in the quiet. And every time I passed a lavender plant or heard a certain kind of laugh, it reminded me of the moment everything shattered. And yet, looking back now 3 years later, no, that was also the moment everything began. Because what I didn't realize then, standing barefoot in my parents' hallway, was that healing doesn't start when you're ready. It starts when you're broken enough to stop pretending you're not. After that night, after I walked away from my own engagement party without a single confrontation, I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart publicly. I folded inward like paper catching fire from one edge, quiet, curling, gone before anyone noticed. Back in Portland, I became a ghost inside my own life. The first thing I did was bury the photos. The ones of Nate and me laughing at the beach, clinking glasses at some vineyard, smiling under Christmas lights. I shoved them into an old shoebox and tucked it beneath a heap of scarves and winter coats. Out of sight, but never really out of mind. I blocked his number, erased Sienna's contact, muted their names anywhere they might appear. But grief is trickier than that. You can delete messages, but you can't delete muscle memory. You can't delete the sting of your sister's laugh echoing in your head, or the scent of your ex's cologne clinging to a sweater you forgot to wash. I told no one what happened. Not my coworkers, not the sweet barista at the corner cafe who always wrote my name with a little heart. I just threw myself into work. 10-hour shifts at the firm, obsessively perfecting floor plans, redrawing blueprints that had already been approved. I'd bring them home and keep editing until the early hours. Exhaustion became a strategy. If I was tired enough, maybe I wouldn't feel anything. For months, I existed in grayscale. Until one Friday, nearly 6 months later, I received an gallery opening downtown, a vague connection from college. I almost deleted it. But something stubborn inside me clicked. I wasn't going to let my life shrink any more than it already had. I went, and that's where I saw him again. Julian Wells. He was taller than I remembered, standing near a sculpture with his hands in his pockets. The kind of relaxed posture that belonged to people who weren't easily shaken. He looked different from the boy I'd seen in passing, back then a friend of Nate's, during their brief grad school overlap. Sienna used to talk about Julian occasionally, always in that tone she saved for men she couldn't quite seduce or outshine. He spotted me before I could turn away. "Amelia Blake," he said, smiling with surprise. "I almost didn't recognize you." I laughed awkwardly. Neither did I. We talked. About art, about Portland's absurdly overpriced lattes. About how red wine at art galleries always tastes like regret. Not once did he mention Nate or Sienna. He asked what I'd been designing lately. Whether I still sketched with pencil or had gone fully digital. What my favorite local coffee shop was. He made space without pressing for entry. That night, I went home lighter than I'd felt in months. Nothing about it felt dramatic. It didn't turn into a sweeping love story overnight. It became something slower, softer, real. We ran into each other again the following weekend, then again at the park on a rainy afternoon. He showed up in small ways, offering warmth without expectations. With Julian, I didn't feel like a woman trying to tape herself back together. I felt like someone remembering how to breathe. He never tried to fix me. He just made room. When I talked, he listened, not to interrupt, not to psychoanalyze, but to hear. really here. Over time, I started letting him in. Not everything, not at once. It came in pieces. A quiet mention of Sienna here. A flicker of hurt there. He never asked for more than I could give. He never filled silence with noise. Some nights, we sat in my living room listening to old jazz records while sipping tea. Other nights, I fell asleep next to him, mascara streaked on my cheeks, wrapped in his quiet understanding, and in the middle of all that simplicity, something bloomed joy. Not performative joy, not the kind you flaunt online, but the kind that settles deep into your bones and says, "You're safe now." I didn't tell my family. I didn't send an update. And when Julian and I decided to marry, it wasn't a rebellion. It was a protection. From the noise. From the weight of other people's expectations. We chose simplicity. Just the two of us at the courthouse. A judge named Linda, who wore pearl earrings and told us love stories in between official lines. Two kind elderly strangers we met in the hallway stood as our witnesses. They smiled like they'd been waiting to believe in love again. We didn't wear white. There were no vows recycled from Pinterest, just hands clasped, eyes locked, and hearts wide open. Afterward, we walked 2 blocks to a small bakery and shared a warm almond croissant. Crumbs landed on Julian's shirt. We laughed not because it was perfect, but because it was ours. Julian never asked me to announce it. Never pressured me to tell my parents or Sienna or Nate. He understood instinctively some things are sacred, and not every truth needs an audience. We built a life that felt like a sanctuary. 2 years passed in that gentle rhythm. We lived in a converted loft with exposed brick walls and houseplants that somehow survived my neglect. He filled our space with art and color. I filled it with books and soft lighting. We hosted dinners for friends who didn't care who I used to be. We took road trips and left our phones in the glove box. It was quiet, uncomplicated, real, and I was happy. Truly, wholly happy. So when my phone rang one spring morning, and I saw my grandfather's name light up the screen, I almost didn't answer. His voice sounded thinner than I remembered. He said, using the nickname no one else had permission to use. "I'll be 80 next month. I'd like one dinner, just the family, just one night." I hesitated. He was the only one who'd remembered my birthday. The only one who mailed a handwritten note on our wedding anniversary, even though we never told anyone. Somehow, he knew. Somehow, he always knew. So I said yes. I said yes to my grandfather, because he was the only one who never stopped calling me M. When I hung up the phone, Julian was watching me from across the kitchen island. A quiet concern resting behind his soft brown eyes. His fingers curled around his coffee mug, but I could see his whole body go still. "You don't have to go," he said gently, crossing the room to stand beside me. His hand found mine and rested there, warm and grounding. "I know," I said, squeezing his fingers. "But I want to for him, not for them." We agreed to go together. This time, I wouldn't walk into that house alone. The drive south to Ashland felt heavier than it ever had before. Every familiar highway sign pulled something old from the past memories I'd tried to leave behind in boxes and deleted texts. As we neared the exit, my stomach tightened. I looked out the window at the tree-lined roads and wondered what had changed, and what hadn't. By the time we pulled into my parents' driveway, the sky had gone golden. That soft evening hour, too beautiful to trust. Everything looked the same. The weathered porch swing. The old wind chime singing its gentle tune. Ivy crawled along the front steps, like no time had passed at all. I stood at the base of the porch, inhaling deeply. I was no longer the girl who ran away that night. I wasn't here to make a scene or reopen wounds. I was here to close a chapter. Julian's hand settled gently at the small of my back. A reminder, I was no longer alone. Inside, the house smelled like rosemary and lemon. My mother offered me a hug that felt like an afterthought, her arms light, her eyes unreadable. She said I looked good, then turned back to the oven. My father nodded once, then returned to checking on the roast. No one mentioned the years I'd been gone. It was like they'd folded my absence neatly into the family narrative, stitched the gap closed, without asking why it had torn open to begin with. I helped my mother set the table. The silence between us, filled with clinks of silverware and the quiet hum of kitchen timers. I was laying down the last of the forks when I heard them two voices. One sharp, the other low. Familiar, too familiar. Sienna and Nate. Their footsteps came before their faces. Sharp heels, heavy dress shoes. I didn't need to turn around to know. Sienna had always walked like the room belonged to her, and Nate, he followed 2 steps behind, like a well-trained shadow. I kept my spine straight as I turned toward them. Sienna paused, mid-step, startled. Nate looked worn down, not tired, but hollow, like he'd been drained of color. Sienna recovered first. "Of course." "Well," she said, lips curling into a practiced smirk. "Look who finally made it out of her little Portland cave. Thought you'd disappeared for good." I didn't blink. "Nice to see you too, Sienna." Her eyes darted to my left hand bare of any ring and back up to my face with mock sweetness. "Still flying solo, huh?" she said, just loudly enough for everyone to hear. I tilted my head slightly. "Actually, no, I'm married." The air shifted. My mother froze, mid-salad toss. My father looked up from the wine decanter. Even my grandfather paused, his brow rising. Sienna's smile faltered just for a second, but I saw it. Nate's brow furrowed slightly. My husband should be here any minute, I added, smoothing out the tablecloth, right on cue. The front door creaked open, footsteps, a coat settling on the rack. Then Julian entered. Calm and composed in a tailored navy coat and dark slacks. He carried with him that quiet confidence that didn't need to be loud to be powerful. His eyes found mine instantly. "Sorry I'm late," he said with a warm smile as he crossed the room. Traffic was chaos. He kissed my temple and slid his arm around my waist like he'd done it 1,000 times. I looked past his shoulder in time to see Sienna's jaw tighten. Nate had gone perfectly still. We took our seats. Julian's hand rested against mine on the table. The conversation shifted to food, small talk, and polite interest in Julian's work. My mother asked a few questions about our apartment and his family. My father offered the occasional nod, but Sienna, she said nothing, barely touched her food, pushed her roasted carrots around the plate like a bored child. Nate sat beside her but didn't speak unless spoken to. The energy between them felt brittle, like a wire pulled too tight after dinner. My grandfather stood with his wineglass raised. His voice trembled slightly, but his words were strong. "To family," he said. "To forgiveness, if we're brave enough. And to the hope that even old roots can bloom again." We all raised our glasses. I met his eyes. He winked. Then, of course, Sienna stood. She tapped her spoon against her glass, with that attention-seeking cling-cling she'd always done. "I'd like to say something," she said sweetly. "About my dear sister Amelia." My stomach clenched. I didn't look away. "It's really quite something," she continued. disappearing for years, and then showing up with a mystery husband no one's ever met. Bold. I'll give you that. I said nothing. Neither did Julian. Some of us believe in transparency, she added. But I suppose others prefer to live in secrecy. She smiled, sharp as a knife. Then Nate stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. That's enough, Sienna, he said quietly. She blinked, stunned. Excuse me. You don't have to do this. Do what? She snapped. Point out that she showed up out of nowhere, acting like I said, that's enough. His voice cut clean through hers. They stared at each other. What was left between them now wasn't love, it was weight, resentment, maybe even regret. Sienna scoffed, grabbed her wine, and stormed out to the patio. Nate followed, his face hollow. They didn't come back. And for the first time in years, I took a deep breath and let myself exhale. Julian helped my grandfather into his favorite armchair as I cleared the table. My mother gave me a long, unreadable look before offering a half-hearted hug. My father muttered something vague about the weather. No one mentioned Sienna or Nate. Again, outside, the air had turned crisp. The scent of garden soil and lemon pie lingered in the breeze. Porch lights cast a soft glow over the driveway. Julian slipped his hand into mine as we walked. You okay? He asked softly. I glanced back at the house, familiar but distant now. Then I looked at him. I am, I said. For the first time in a long time. I really am. We walked in silence to the car. Not the kind that aches, but the kind that heals. Everything I had lost, every wound, every betrayal had led me here. And I knew now, I didn't return to confront them. Returned to reclaim myself. This wasn't revenge, it was freedom.